I think Mary, when the Bible introduces her to us, what we find out about Mary in Luke chapter 8 is that when Jesus met her, she was possessed by 7 demons. So really keep that in mind. She was possessed. Her first encounter with Christ then is that she is in utter despair. Mental illness, anger, reputation. I think if we went around Redlands today, we could find somebody who is similar to that description. Someone who is hopeless. Someone who is living their lives in complete loneliness. Someone who no one knows and no one wants to get to know her. And I think the sad thing is we can look at Mary Magdalene at her time before she meets Christ, and we can just draw the conclusion it's because of her condition of having these spirits within her. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, each one of us, maybe even ourselves, suffers from loneliness, suffers from constant depression, suffers from these things of maybe anger and a reputation that we just can't shake, that we're constantly judged by our past, we're judged by our present. And we can have these feelings and they can totally alienate us, first of all, from God, but secondly, from everybody else we walk into contact with. And I think the only hope that we have is the same hope that Mary had. That these rumors about this man named Jesus Christ, how he heals the sick and opens the eyes of the blind and causes the lame to walk, the deaf to hear, the leper to be cleansed, that maybe if I can meet him, maybe if I can just encounter him some way, that maybe he might cleanse me too. Maybe he might set me free from me. And when they do meet, that's exactly what happens to Mary. She meets Christ, and all these demons are cleansed from her. She is a new woman. But here's the beauty of it. No matter what condition Christ found her in, Christ sees her for who she really is, and that is a child of God. Someone who has infinite worth, no matter what she's done, no matter where she's been, no matter what people think of her. As Jesus meets her on that road, what he sees is a woman. What he sees, who he sees, is not how she looks, but who she is on the inside. And Christ comes to each one of us, and we encounter him in that way. He doesn't see us as the alcoholic or the drug addict or the rich person or the poor person or the educated person or the uneducated person. He sees us as God has made us to be, people made in his image with infinite worth. And as Christ comes to Mary, and we probably find her in the lowest of states of human existence, imprisoned within herself, without hope, completely alone. And when he encounters her there, he gives all these things to her immediately. And I believe because of that, Mary loved Christ more than any of his disciples. And I think the only person that might be able to trump Mary on her love for Jesus was Jesus' mother. No one loves like a mom, right? But Mary, as she is set free from these demons, she begins to follow Jesus, leaves everything behind, and she takes what substance she does have, her time, her person, and her money, and she totally uses it now for the service of Christ. She's not going in halfway. She's not there to get what Jesus can give her. She's there to give Jesus everything she has. And she follows him, and she pays for the ministry along with the other women. She follows him that day, even to the very cross where he is crucified. And you will find there in John 19 that at the foot of the cross is Mary, the aunt of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene. There she is. And I want you to really put yourself in her situation, because in one instant, she is now redeemed and filled with hope, and she has purpose. But now as she stands at the foot of the cross, all that is dashed to pieces. Who she was found in the person of Christ. Who she longed to be was found as she walked with Christ. All of a sudden, at the cross, all her worst nightmares come back to haunt her. And as she's waiting there, probably hoping, she's probably thinking, he's saved, just like the Pharisees said. He saved others. He will now save himself. He will come off that cross. And her hopes are dashed as she witnessed the soldier putting the spear into the side of Christ. Do you feel her despair? Do you feel her loneliness returning? As she sees Jesus say those last words, it is finished. I think for Mary, her life was finished too. And this is the saddest part for me. I believe this. Most of us at some time in our life will feel that way. We will feel that Christ is forsaken us. We will feel like we are utterly alone. We will feel like no one understands me. No one cares about me. No one gives me worth. No one. And Jesus comes to us and he calls. But there is Mary, you guys. And that's where we find her now in our story. Jesus has now been put in the tomb. And in verse 10, and now in verses 1 through 10, understand that Peter and John, Mary finds herself, look at this again, I just love her heart. There in the first verse of chapter 20, and as you open your new Bibles that the church has for you there, and if you have poor eyesight, I have good news for you. They're large font, so I enjoy them very much. But it says there in verse 1 of chapter 20, early the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciples, to the one that Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. There is Mary again. I think she wept bitterly at the cross of Christ. I think she wept as they laid him in the tomb. And the next morning, she probably cried herself to sleep. And the next morning, she goes to the tomb, and she is still weeping. She is still broken. She is still in despair. She is still in holiness and in loneliness. And the only thing she has is the memory of Jesus. That's all she has. She has nothing else. And I don't know if you guys have seen those pictures online of the widows of our fallen military. You'll find a wife in a church laying at the casket of her husband. I saw another photo of a widow, young girl, a young wife, lying on a blanket by the tombstone of her husband who had died, broken. And I believe when you look at those pictures, what you find is the same view of Mary as she stands outside now the empty tomb. She just went there to weep. She went there to put her hand on that rock and remember all that Christ had done for her. That's why she went. That's all she had was memory. All she had was the past. Her future had been robbed from her. When they took Jesus, they took everything from her. And maybe there's an instance in your life where you say, I feel that way. I've been there. In my marriage, in my job, in my family, where everything is just taken away, your health. And you sit there and you feel alone. I'm here to tell you, you're not. I'm here to tell you that what Mary is going to find is something that we can all find here this morning if we look to Christ. Now the psalmist says there in Psalm 30, verse 5, weeping endures for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Midnight is where the day begins. So if you find yourself at this crossroad this morning, and this crossroad is, I could go down a path, and it's calling to me, a path that wants to deal with my hopelessness and my anger and my despair, and it's going to lead me to addiction. I know where it's going to lead me, but I really don't have that many choices. Or you could take the road of faith. You could take the road of faith and you could lay your hope and hang your heart on the person and the work of Jesus Christ. Because our pasts were paid for on that cross. Our sins were cleansed from us on that cross. And that is the promise that Christ gives. Weeping endures for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Midnight, you guys, in the darkest part of the night, midnight is where that new day begins. And I think here's the beautiful part. Sometimes it's by our own choices that we find ourselves in that dark place. Sometimes it's by our own lust or our own pride that we find ourselves utterly alone. We have wounded all those that would come around us. We have angered those who love us. We have alienated anybody that would want to come near us. And we find ourselves now in that place of midnight. But again, midnight, God comes to you. Christ comes and he reaches out to you, and Christ comes and he calls you by your name. You know, through this last year with my son, I've had many midnights, many times in his despair, in his pain, in his anger, that I wanted to say, Lord, please, let me exchange places with my boy. Maybe just for the night. Let me just take his pain. Just for the night, Lord. Please let me just have what he's suffering, just so he'll get a good night's sleep. Please, Lord. And I'll be honest with you, all he'll say is, I'm here. Is that enough? You know, in this past week, Sevy's had a really hard week. And on Monday, we were coming back from the clinic, and they had a hard time accessing his port, and it caused a lot of pain, and the chemo really just knocked him out, and he was really depressed. And Sevy's a pretty chipper little guy when he's healthy. And he's looking out the window, and I'm trying to encourage him. It's only one more week to go, buddy, and then you'll be on maintenance, and then you'll be able to go back to school and be able to play soccer again, and blah, blah, blah. And he's just not having it. And I said, okay, buddy, what's wrong? And he goes, Dad, today was just really hard. It's really hard on me. And I said, and I don't know if you know me. There's a few people in this church sitting here this morning that know me really well, so this won't surprise them. But my surprise the rest of you guys, I'm not the most tender guy in the world. I'm not. And I have a way of just like, let's just give it to me straight so I can handle this. So I said, okay, Sevy, I'm going to tell you something, buddy. And he's like, what, Dad? I'm like, welcome to life. Well, you're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have days that knock you down. But here's the question. Are you going to get up? Are you going to hope again? Are you going to believe again? And he looked at me like, you're the worst dad in the world. You know, like, where's Mom? Mom would be like, do you want to get some ice cream? What can I get you? And I'm like, I go, here's the reason I tell you this, son. Because how you choose to handle this, you choose who you are. If you choose to be angry and depressed and bitter, that's who you become. But you didn't let me finish, because the one thing I was going to tell you, you might feel you're alone, but you're never alone. Jesus is always with you. And he goes, I love him. I wish my daughter would listen to him more. And he says these words, you're right, Dad. You're right. Thanks. And we just went home. And he kind of went to his room, and he kind of regrouped, and he came back, and he was fighting the good fight. But it is a fight. You know, I used to box when I was a kid. You know what I loved? This, again, tells you about who I am. I used to love hitting people. You know what I hated? Getting hit. I hated it. But if you're going to get in a fight, you're going to get hit. And the Bible never says it's an easy road. The Bible never once said you just kind of cruise in on an escalator into God's kingdom. It never said that. Through trials and through tribulations, you will enter the kingdom of heaven. But the promise of the Bible is you are never alone. Ever. And Christ can come to you in your loneliness, in your despair. And he could say, I know how you feel. I have walked that path for you, and now I walk that path with you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. Ever. And we find Mary at this tomb feeling all of the worst things a human being can feel, and yet she's there. And it says this, as she wept, she bent over and looked into the tomb. Verse 12, and she saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, woman, why are you crying? They have taken my Lord away. She said, and I don't know where they have put him. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but did not realize it was Jesus. Woman, he said, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Thinking that he was a gardener, She said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." I think, one of the most beautiful things in the world is this story, because when he calls her, it's like for Mary, all that loneliness, all that darkness, all that despair is blown away. And all of a sudden what fills her heart now is hope and love and relationship and closeness to Christ. Everything that the cross took away from her, the resurrected Christ gives back to her in abundance. And we see in the story that when he calls her name, all of a sudden she goes and she dives and she grabs his feet. And she doesn't want to let go. She lost him once, she wasn't going to lose him again. And he says, "Hey, you got to let me go." Because his relationship with her was going to change now. It was turning. It was becoming something new and something different. And as he says, "Let me go, I have not ascended to my Father yet," what he is telling her, we are going to have a new relationship, Mary. For 3 years you followed me. And your closest to me was the proximity of which we were together. But now, Mary, now that I go to my Father, I'm not going to just be with you, I'm going to be in you, Mary. My Spirit, who I give you now, a new birth, a new hope, is going to be birthed within your heart, Mary. I will never be far from you ever again. We will never be separated, Mary, ever again. Now walk with me, Mary. And where the cross took away her purpose, now the resurrected Christ gives it back to her. Her life was used or lived out before the cross in serving Jesus. But now her life was going to be lived out on the promise that Christ gave her. And that promise was to all of us, that I will never leave you nor forsake you. But when she turns from him and he says, "Mary," and then she turns around and she dives for him. We guys have people constantly trying to get our attention. Every billboard, every commercial you see, every commercial you hear, every advertisement you read in the market, everybody's trying to get your attention. Everybody's trying to tell you what you need for your life. Everybody's trying to tell you what to drive, what to wear, and what to eat, and how to tell time, and what phone you need. We live in a world today, you guys, where we instantly see when someone's at Disneyland, the beach, and they always got to tell you what they're eating. If you are my friend and you take a picture of your dinner, please don't send it to me. I don't care, okay? I don't care. Good for you. Enjoy it, right? But we're constantly living in this thing. But I will say this. I think we are more lonely than we've ever been. I think we're more poverty-stricken than we've ever been. Because with Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all these things, we're looking at other people's lives and we are not living. We envy. We think our lives are empty because they have and we don't. I got news for you. They're just like us. But my question is, does anybody know your name? Not what you did. Not what you ate, not what you're wearing, not what you drive. But does anybody know your hurt, your disappointment, your joy, your pain, your suffering? Do they know that? Do they know your story? Jesus does. And when he says, "Mary," she's like, John always said, the one whom Jesus loved, right? When he says Mary, Mary would say, the one who loves me, the one who knows me, the one who values me, the one who gives me purpose, the one who gives me life, the one who gives me new life. Mary, who knows you? Who knows you? We are so scared of being judged. We're so scared of being found wanting. We're so scared of disappointing somebody. Jesus comes to you and says, "You'll never could do that. Ever. Mary. Mary. I saw a skit years ago, and it really had a big impact on me. It was a high school camp. 4 girls are in a room. They're growing up. They're going through childhood and adolescence. And as the oldest one becomes a young adult, she hears the place where they're living becoming smaller and smaller. So the oldest girl, she takes off. She goes, I'm going to see what's out there, and I'll come back and I'll tell you guys. So she leaves, never comes back. The second one leaves, same thing. Leaves only 2 now. The third one leaves, and the room gets smaller and smaller. And finally, the third girl, though, pops back in. And she's kind of been partying, and remember this is a youth camp thing, and this is like a high school thing. She comes in and she's drunk, and she's talking about how she's been partying and doing drugs. And the girls go, but what else is it like out there? What else is it like? She goes, oh my gosh, there's so many voices, and people are shouting at you, and they're trying to grab you and tells you to go this way and that way. She goes, is that it? Is that all that is out there? The girl says, no. There's another voice. It's a still small voice. And the little girl says, what does it say? He says, that voice says, follow me. The world draws you by your desires, by your fears, and by your insecurities. That's how they get us. Jesus tells us to follow him, but he calls us by our names. And when he calls you, he is telling you, I know you. I love you. I value you. You say, but God, you don't know what I've done. He says, yes, I do. I forgive you. Now follow me. Mary did exactly what the Lord told her to do. He says, let me go. I got something more for you than this. And then he says, now go tell my disciples. Go tell my disciples. The world says buy, Jesus says give. Who knows your name? Do you hear him calling you this morning?